My name is Mason. I'm 28 years old. And my own father looked me straight in the eye and told me he'd spent my entire life savings on someone he considered better than me. Before I tell you how my grandmother's next words would shatter my family's web of lies and change the course of my life forever, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The silence in the dining room was a physical thing. You could feel it pressing on your skin, sinking into your bones. It wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy, filled with everything that had never been said in our house. The air, thick with the scent of roasted chicken and my mom's lemon-scented cleaner, suddenly felt hard to breathe. My dad, Richard, hadn't flinched. Not a twitch in his jaw, not a flicker in his eye. He just held my gaze from across the polished mahogany table, his fork resting beside a perfectly cut piece of meat. "We spent your savings on someone better," he repeated, his voice as calm and level as if he were discussing the weather. The words hung there, obscene in their simplicity. My fork, halfway to my mouth, stopped. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. I looked around the table. My mom, Helen, was suddenly fascinated by a non-existent speck of dust on her water glass. My younger brother, Leo, froze mid-chew, his eyes wide, a deer caught in the headlights. And my grandmother, Eleanor, who had been quiet all evening, slowly placed her knife and fork down, the silver making a soft, deliberate clink against the fine china. The sound cut through the tension like a razor. My own voice, when it finally came out, was barely a whisper, a single, ragged breath. "Better than me?" My dad sighed, a small, irritated puff of air, as if my question was a minor inconvenience. "Your brother needed the support, Mason. You didn't. It's simple. Simple." He used the word simple to describe gutting my future. He used it to justify a betrayal so deep it felt like it was rewriting my past. All those years of working 2 jobs, of skipping nights out with friends to pick up an extra shift, of meticulously tucking away every spare dollar. All of it dismissed as if it were nothing. But it wasn't my dad's coldness that broke the spell. It was the sound of my grandmother's chair scraping against the hardwood floor. It was an abrupt, jarring noise in the suffocating quiet. She stood up, slowly, but with a presence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. At 75, she wasn't tall, but right then, she towered over all of us. Her face, usually lined with soft wrinkles of kindness, had hardened into granite. Her eyes, fixed on her son, were chips of ice. Her voice was low, but it carried an authority that no one in that room dared to challenge. "Richard," she said, each word a perfectly formed stone. "Name that someone." Her gaze didn't waver. "Right now." And as my father's composure finally cracked, as a flicker of panic crossed his face for the first time, I knew this was more than just a family argument. This was a reckoning. But to understand the weight of my grandmother's command, to understand why her quiet strength was the most powerful force in that room, you have to understand that this betrayal wasn't born at a dinner table. It had been growing in the shadows of our home for my entire life. Growing up, our family wasn't a democracy. It was a monarchy, and my younger brother, Leo, was the crown prince. He was born with a halo of potential that only my parents seemed to see. It wasn't something he earned, it was just there. He breathed it, and the rest of us were expected to orbit around it. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who folded himself small to take up less space. I remember my 16th birthday. I'd been working part-time for a year at a local diner, saving up for a used, beat-up sedan I'd seen for sale. It wasn't much, but it was freedom. I didn't get the car. I got a thoughtful book on graphic design from my grandmother, and a crisp $100 bill from my parents with a card that read, "We're so proud of how you're learning to stand on your own 2 feet. 2 months later, it was Leo's 16th birthday. We walked out onto the driveway to find a brand new, cherry red convertible with a giant bow on the hood. Leo hooped, jumping up and down. My dad clapped him on the back, beaming. "Only the best for my future CEO," he'd said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Later that night, I found my mom in the kitchen. I tried to keep my voice steady. Mom, why? She didn't even look up from the dishes she was washing. Mason, you're different. You're practical. You understand the value of hard work. Leo, he needs encouragement. He needs to see what's possible to feel successful. It helps motivate him. So my hard work pays for my things, and his potential pays for his? The question was bitter on my tongue. She finally turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression wasn't mean. It was worse. It was pitying. Don't be dramatic. Your father and I just want to give your brother every advantage. You're strong enough to make your own way. We're proud of that. It was a perfect trap. How do you argue against a compliment that's being used to justify treating you as less? So I said nothing. I learned that my strength wasn't a quality to be celebrated. It was an excuse to be ignored. The pattern repeated itself endlessly. At school award nights, I'd bring home certificates for academic excellence or a prize from a statewide art competition. My parents would clap politely. My dad would lean over and whisper, "That's nice, son. Imagine what Leo will do when he really applies himself." My achievements were always just a prelude to Leo's theoretical future greatness. They poured money into his hobbies that lasted a few weeks, tennis lessons, a DJ setup, even flying lessons at one point. Each one was an investment in his future. Meanwhile, my dream of starting a small graphic design business after college was treated as a nice, but unrealistic hobby. "It's a tough market, Mason," my dad would say. "Better to have a steady salary, a stable job, like the one you have now. Stability, responsibility, practicality." These weren't words of praise. They were the bars of my cage. I was the reliable workhorse, while Leo was the thoroughbred racehorse, too precious to be burdened with the weight of his own life. I spent years thinking this was normal, that this was just how families worked. One sun, one planet. I didn't realize I wasn't a planet. I was just the fuel being shoveled into the furnace to keep the sun burning bright. The diner was my first real taste of independence. The smell of stale coffee, sizzling bacon, and bleach became the smell of freedom. I was 15, and every dollar I earned felt like a small, solid piece of a life I was building for myself, separate from the one that had been assigned to me at home. I started with a weekend shift, then picked up evenings after school. My hands were perpetually calloused and smelled faintly of grease, but my wallet was getting heavier. I wasn't just saving for a car anymore. I was saving for a future where I didn't have to ask for anything, where I could pay for my own college supplies, maybe even contribute to a decent college fund so I wouldn't be saddled with crippling debt. A future where my success was measured by my own efforts, not by how much support I didn't need. When I turned 18 and was about to head off to community college, I had a decent amount saved up. It was sitting in a simple checking account, and I knew I needed to do something smarter with it. That's when my dad sat me down. We were in his home office, a room that always felt more like a corporate boardroom than a part of our house. "Mason," he said, steepling his fingers. It was his serious business gesture. "I'm proud of your work ethic. Really, I am. But leaving that money in a checking account is foolish. You're losing money to inflation." He pulled out a brochure from a well-known investment bank. "I have a relationship with these people. We can open a proper savings and investment account for you. It'll be linked to my primary account, which makes managing it easier, and I can help guide your investments. We'll get you a much better return. Think of it as a starter portfolio." I hesitated. Part of me, the part that had built this nest egg in secret, wanted to keep it separate, to keep it mine. But another part of me, the part that still craved his approval, was flattered. My dad, who usually only talked business with Leo, was offering to help me. Felt like a promotion. Felt like he was finally seeing me as an adult. "It will still be my account, right? My name on it?" I asked. "Of course," he said, smiling a rare, genuine-looking smile. "It's your money, your hard work. I'm just here to help it grow. This is what families do, son. We protect each other's futures." I believed him. I handed over my trust as easily as I handed over my account details. Over the next few years, I funneled everything into that account. The paychecks from my college job doing graphic design for the student union. The money from freelance gigs I took on late at night. Every birthday check from my grandmother. I'd get statements in the mail showing steady growth. It became my point of pride, my secret fortress. By the time I was 28, working as a junior designer at a mid-sized firm in the city, that account was supposed to be my launchpad. It was more than a safety net. It was the seed money for my own design studio. It was the physical manifestation of a decade of sacrifice. It was my proof to myself and maybe someday to them that the quiet, responsible son had built something worthy all on his own. I had no idea I was just building a bigger, better furnace for them to plunder. The day the ground fell out from under me started like any other Wednesday. It was gray and drizzly, the kind of day that makes the city feel weary. I got home to my small apartment, the one with thin walls and a view of a brick building, but it was mine. I'd paid for every piece of thrift store furniture, every mismatched plate in the kitchen. I was doing my end-of-month budget, a ritual I never skipped. I heated up leftover spaghetti, opened my laptop, and clicked the bookmark for my bank. The login screen appeared. I typed in my password. The summary page loaded, and I stared. The number didn't make sense. It wasn't just low. It was a number you see after a weekend of irresponsible spending, not a month of careful saving. I blinked, thinking the page hadn't loaded correctly. I hit refresh. The little circle spun, and the same impossible number reappeared. My heart started a low, heavy drum against my ribs. Don't panic. It's a glitch. It has to be a glitch. I navigated to the transaction history page. My breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't a glitch. It was a massacre. There were withdrawals, transfers, payments I had never made to names I didn't recognize. Not one or two. A long, devastating list of them stretching back months. They were clever, I had to give them that. The amounts were varied, spaced out over time. Small enough not to trigger an immediate alert, but consistent enough to drain a decade of work down to almost nothing. It was like a slow, silent bleed. Someone had been carefully, methodically draining my lifeblood, counting on the fact that I was too busy, too trusting to notice. My spaghetti was cold. My hands were shaking. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over my dad's contact. He managed the account. He would know what this was. Maybe it was a mistake. A tax payment I'd forgotten about, an investment that went south. There had to be a logical explanation. I dialed the number for the bank first. I got a polite customer service representative who put me on hold for 10 minutes. When she came back, her voice was professionally vague. "Sir, I can't discuss the specifics of the transfers, but I can confirm they were all authorized from the primary linked account." The primary account? My dad's. "I can't confirm the name, sir. But yes, all transactions were initiated by the primary account holder. There have been no security breaches." The line went quiet. No security breach. That meant the call was coming from inside the house. I hung up the phone, the plastic feeling slick and cold in my palm. I thought about the account manager my dad had set me up with, a man named Mr. Henderson. I called his direct line. He sounded flustered. "Mason, good to hear from you," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Everything okay?" "No, Mr. Henderson, it's not. My account is nearly empty. There are thousands of dollars missing." There was a pause. I could hear him shuffling papers. "Ah, yes. Well, your father, Richard, handled those transfers. They were all processed correctly. Family portfolio adjustments, I believe he called them. Family portfolio adjustments." The sterile, corporate phrase made my stomach turn. This wasn't an adjustment. This was theft. And the person holding the gun was my own father. That Saturday, I drove the 2 hours to my parents' house. The entire way, I rehearsed what I was going to say. I practiced being calm, being firm. I told myself I would not raise my voice. I would not make accusations. I would simply present the facts and ask for an explanation. I was still clinging to a sliver of hope that this was all a terrible, elaborate misunderstanding. The hope died the moment I walked through the door. The house was filled with the familiar scent of my mom's pot roast. But something was different. There was a buzz in the air, an excitement that rarely had anything to do with me. I found the source in the living room. Leo was sitting on the floor, surrounded by sleek, brand-new boxes. In his lap was a state-of-the-art digital drawing tablet, the kind professional designers dream of. Beside him was a powerful new laptop and a set of noise-canceling headphones. It was thousands of dollars worth of equipment. "Wow," I said, my voice tight. "Looks like Christmas came early." Leo didn't even look up. He was too busy running a stylus across the tablet screen. "Yeah, it's pretty sweet. Dad said it was time I had a professional setup for my business classes. Said you need to spend money to make money, you know?" My chest felt like it was in a vice. My savings, my decade of work, sitting right there on the living room floor, being treated like a shiny new toy. My mom came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Mason, you're here. Isn't it wonderful? Leo is finally getting serious about his future." She beamed at Leo with a look of pure adoration. "He's getting serious? Mom, I've been working in this field for 6 years. I built my career from nothing." She waved a dismissive hand, as if shooing away a fly. "Oh, honey, that was your choice. And you've done so well for yourself. You're stable. Leo needs a little push, a little investment to get him started." The condescension was suffocating. My stability wasn't an achievement. It was a reason to be dismissed. Later, after dinner, Leo disappeared into his room to play with his new gadgets. My mom was upstairs. I found my dad in his office, reading the Wall Street Journal. The moment of confrontation I had rehearsed all day was finally here. I stood in the doorway, my bank statements clutched in my hand. "Dad, we need to talk." He lowered his paper, looking at me over the top of his reading glasses. "What is it, Mason?" "It's about my savings account," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts. "There's money missing. A lot of it." He didn't blink. He showed no surprise, no concern. Nothing. He just folded his newspaper, set it down with unnerving precision, and looked at me. "We didn't think you'd notice so soon," he said. The casual cruelty of that sentence stole my breath. You used it?" "We did," he said, his tone matter of fact. "We used it for your brother. He's at a critical point in his life. He needs these tools, these opportunities. Things you never needed." "I never needed opportunities?" I asked, incredulous. "I made my own." "Exactly," he replied, as if I had just proven his point. "You're fine. You're self-sufficient. Leo's future requires more support, more capital." It was a simple business decision. We reallocated family assets to where they would generate the best return. My life's work, my future, reduced to family assets. I wasn't his son. I was a line item on a balance sheet. And in his cold, calculating eyes, I had been liquidated. I stood there in the doorway of his office, reeling. The room, with its dark wood and leather-bound books, suddenly felt like a cage. My father had already picked up his newspaper, a clear dismissal. The conversation, in his mind, was over. He had made a business decision, and I was expected to accept it. But something he said, or rather, something about the way he said it, snagged in my mind. "We didn't think you'd notice so soon." It implied a longer game. It implied this wasn't the end of it. Couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed of my childhood room, staring at the ceiling, every cold word from my father replaying in my head. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Around 2 a.m., driven by an instinct I couldn't explain, I crept downstairs. The office door was slightly ajar. A single desk lamp cast a pale yellow glow across the room. My father was a man of habit. He kept all important financial documents in the bottom right-hand drawer of his mahogany desk. I had seen him go into it 1,000 times. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled the drawer open. It slid out with a soft, well-oiled sound. On top were neat stacks of bills and investment reports. But underneath them, tucked away at the back, was a plain manila folder. It had my name on it, Mason Carter. My hand trembled as I lifted it out. This was it. This had to be the statements from my account, the ones he was hiding from me. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It wasn't just my bank statements. Lying on top was a sheaf of papers I'd never seen before. It was a completed application for a personal business loan. A substantial one. $25,000. The application was filled out with my personal information, my social security number, my address, my employment history, and at the bottom on the signature line was a crude, forged version of my signature. I sank to the floor, the folder in my lap. I felt dizzy, nauseous. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was a whole different level of violation. They hadn't just drained my past. They were trying to mortgage my future. They were going to put me into debt, under my own name, to continue funding Leo's life. The signature was shaky, an amateur attempt. It was my father's handwriting trying to be mine. He must have been planning to submit it soon. He was counting on my silence, my reluctance to create conflict. He was counting on the son he had trained for 28 years to just take it, to absorb the blow and quietly figure out how to pay it off. That's when the sadness curdled into something else, something hard and sharp. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a white-hot rage. This wasn't about favoritism anymore. This wasn't about a business decision. This was a calculated criminal act. They hadn't just seen me as a resource to be used. They saw me as a blank check to be forged. I carefully placed the papers back in the folder. I took out my phone and, with shaking hands, I took a picture of every single page. The application, the forged signature, the bank statements showing the withdrawals. Each click of the camera shutter felt like loading a bullet into a gun. I slid the folder back into the drawer, exactly as I had found it. I closed it without a sound. As I crept back up the stairs, the victim inside me died. The son who just wanted his father's approval was gone. In his place, something new was taking root. A man who was about to go to war. The drive back to the city was a blur. The rage was a constant, high-pitched ringing in my ears. The first person I called was Chloe. We'd been friends since our first art class in college, and now she was a paralegal at a corporate law firm, studying for the bar. She was the most level-headed person I knew. We met at a 24-hour diner, the same kind of place I used to work. I slid into the booth across from her, my face grim. I didn't even order coffee. I just laid it all out. The empty account, Leo's new toys, the cold confession, and finally, the forged loan application. I showed her the photos on my phone. Her eyes widened with each detail. She took the phone from my hands, swiping through the pictures, her expression shifting from disbelief to professional fury. "Mason," she said, her voice low and serious. "This isn't a family drama anymore. This is grand larceny and identity theft. What your father is doing is a felony. Several felonies, actually." She pushed the phone back across the table. "You could send him to prison for this." The word prison hung in the air. The thought of my own father behind bars was sickening, but the reality of what he'd done was even worse. "What do I do, Chloe?" "You document everything," she said, her legal mind kicking in. "Print those photos. Get official copies of your bank statements. Create a timeline of every withdrawal. And you do not talk to them again without a lawyer present. I mean it, Mason. They see you as an ATM, not a person. You need to protect yourself." Her words were a bucket of ice water, shocking but clarifying. I left the diner with a grim sense of purpose. But old habits die hard. On the way home, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister. "Mason, honey, your mother called me. She's so worried about you," she began, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. "She said you were upset about some financial arrangements." I was vague. "Something like that." "Listen," she said, sighing dramatically. "I know it seems unfair, but you have to try and see the bigger picture. Your parents have so much pressure on them with Leo. He's just different. He needs more help. You've always been the strong one. Sometimes the strong ones have to carry a little more of the weight for the good of the family. Don't let a little thing like money break you all apart. A little thing like money, my entire life's work. A forged loan that could ruin my credit for years." She was feeding me the same poison my parents did, just with a sweeter coating. She was the enabler, the one who validated their twisted logic. "Thanks for the advice, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice cold. "I have to go." I hung up before she could reply. The conversation, as manipulative as it was, did one good thing. It solidified my resolve. My family wasn't just my parents and my brother. It was an entire ecosystem built to support one person at the expense of another. And I was done being the foundation they stood on. Chloe was right. I needed to protect myself. But I knew I needed more than just a lawyer. I needed an ally. Someone from inside their world. Someone they would have to listen to. And there was only one person who fit that description. My grandmother. My grandmother Eleanor's house was on the other side of the city. A quiet little brick home with a garden she tended to with meticulous care. It always smelled of old books, Earl Grey tea, and potting soil. It was the one place in my life that had always felt like a sanctuary. I called her before I went, my voice tight. "Grandma, can I come over? There's something important I need to talk to you about." She didn't ask questions. She just said, "The kettle's on, dear. Come whenever you're ready." When she opened the door, she took one look at my face and her warm smile faded into a look of concern. She ushered me inside, guiding me to the worn armchair in her living room. She handed me a cup of tea, her touch gentle on my trembling hands. "All right, Mason," she said, sitting opposite me. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." And I did. For the first time, I let the dam break. I told her about the years of feeling invisible, about the birthdays, the awards, the constant, casual dismissals. I told her about my dream of starting my own studio, and the savings I had worked so hard to build. Then, my voice cracking, I told her about the empty account, my father's chilling confession, and the final, unthinkable betrayal of the forged loan application. I pulled out the folder I had prepared, the one with the printed photos and the bank statements Chloe had told me to get. I laid them out on the coffee table between us. She didn't interrupt me once. She just listened, her gaze fixed on my face. As I spoke, I could see a transformation happening. The soft, kindly grandmother was receding, and in her place was a woman of formidable strength. Her jaw was set, her back was ramrod straight, and her eyes, the same clear blue as my own, were filled with a cold, hard light I had never seen before. When I finished, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. She looked down at the papers on the table, picking up the photo of the forged signature. She stared at it for a long moment. "My son did this," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of grim fact. She looked back up at me, and in her eyes, I saw not pity, but a profound, validating anger. "You have been far too patient for far too long, Mason," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with conviction. "They mistook your strength for weakness, your silence for acceptance. That ends now." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was small and wrinkled, but it felt as strong as steel. "You are not a resource to be exploited," she said, her eyes locking with mine. "You are my grandson, and nobody does this to my grandson. We are going to get you your justice, and we are going to do it in a way they will never forget." In that moment, I knew I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I had a queen on my side of the chessboard. The next hour in my grandmother's living room was a masterclass in strategy. The grief and anger were still there, but now they were being channeled, refined into a clear plan of action. "Confronting your father alone is pointless," Eleanor stated, her voice crisp and businesslike. "He'll bully you, your mother will cry, and they'll manipulate you into feeling guilty. We need a different venue, one where they can't control the narrative." That's when she proposed the idea of a family dinner. "I'll call your mother and say I'm in town and would love for everyone to get together. She won't be able to refuse. It will be on their turf, which will make them feel confident." Overconfident. She looked at the pile of evidence on the table. "This is your ammunition, but you can't fire it all at once. You wait. You let your father make his move. He's arrogant. He'll try to control the situation, to justify himself in front of me. Let him. She mapped it out like a general planning a battle. She told me to arrive on time, not early, to be polite but distant, to keep the folder in my bag until the perfect moment. "He will bring it up," she said with absolute certainty. "His ego won't let him ignore the tension. He'll want to address it on his terms, to make you look like the ungrateful one. When he does, you will answer him with one simple question, the one you asked him in his office, and then you will be silent, and you will let me handle the rest." As we talked, I saw a side of her I never knew existed. This wasn't just my sweet old grandma. This was a sharp, strategic thinker. She mentioned my grandfather, who had passed away years ago. "Your grandfather built his construction business from the ground up," she said, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "I was his bookkeeper, his partner, his silent board member for 40 years. I learned a thing or two about dealing with bullies in suits. And your father, for all his bluster, is just a bully in a sweater vest." She paused, looking at me intently. "There's one more thing you must remember, Mason. Your father's greatest weakness is that he underestimates what he can't control. He thinks he controls the money, the family, you. He has no idea that some things are beyond his grasp." Her words were cryptic, but they were filled with a confidence that was contagious. I left her house that evening feeling transformed. The fear and confusion had been replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim walking into a confrontation. I was a soldier, armed with the truth and following a plan laid out by the smartest general I knew. I went home and organized the papers into a clean, professional-looking binder. I was ready. I walked into my parents' house exactly at 7 o'clock. The air was thick with a forced cheerfulness that was almost more suffocating than the silence I'd left behind last time. My mother, Helen, rushed forward to hug me, her movements too quick, too jerky. "Mason, we're so glad you could make it," she chirped, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Leo was sulking on the couch, scrolling furiously on his phone, trying to make himself invisible. My father, Richard, stood by the mantelpiece, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking every bit the lord of the manor. He gave me a curt nod. "Mason, good of you to come." My grandmother was already seated at the dining table, a picture of calm elegance. She met my eyes and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the reassurance I needed. My heart, which had been pounding in my chest, settled into a steady, determined rhythm. I carried my briefcase, the one containing the binder, and set it down by my chair. Dinner was a masterclass in denial. We talked about the weather. We talked about sports. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Ben, who had also been invited, chattered nervously about their recent vacation. My father dominated the conversation, telling a long, boring story about a deal he'd closed at work, a clear display of his own importance. I remained quiet, polite. I answered direct questions with short, simple answers. I could feel my father's eyes on me, probing, waiting. He was expecting me to break, to start the argument. I refused to give him the satisfaction. Finally, as my mother was clearing the main course plates, he made his move. He cleared his throat, commanding the table's attention. "Mason," he began, his voice laced with that familiar, patronizing tone. "I'm glad you came tonight. It gives us a chance to clear the air. I know you were emotional about our recent financial decisions." The room went dead silent. Aunt Carol froze with a forkful of pie halfway to her mouth. "I want you to understand," he continued, leaning forward, "that every decision your mother and I make is for the good of this entire family. We're proud of how independent you are. But your independence means you don't need the same level of support as your brother." And then he delivered the line, the one that had started it all. He said it with an air of finality, as if it were an undeniable truth. "We spent your savings on someone better." I felt my grandmother's gaze on me, steady and strong. I took a slow breath just as she'd instructed. I met my father's gaze across the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the fury show. I just asked the question, letting it fall into the silence like a stone into a deep well. "Better than me?" My father scoffed. Don't be childish. This isn't about you. It's about securing Leo's future. That was the cue. My grandmother's chair scraped back. She stood. Every eye in the room snapped to her. Richard, she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. Name that someone. Right now. My father's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Mother, this is a private family matter. It doesn't concern you. Everything this family does concerns me, she retorted, especially when it involves theft. Before my father could explode, I reached down, opened my briefcase, and pulled out the binder. My hands were perfectly steady. I placed it on the center of the table with a soft, definitive thud. I brought something, I said, my voice clear and even. Richard's eyes narrowed. Mason, don't do this. I opened the binder. The first page was a summary of the withdrawals, dates and amounts lined up like soldiers on parade. I slowly, silently, turned the page to reveal the bank statements. Then the next to the photos of Leo's new equipment with their prices circled in red. And finally, I turned to the last page. The forged loan application. A collective gasp went through the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Leo looked from the papers to his father, confusion and horror dawning on his face. Wait! That money came from Mason's account? The mask of paternal authority finally slipped from my father's face, replaced by pure, cornered rage. You went through my desk? Richard hissed, his voice low and venomous. He wasn't looking at me, but at the papers, as if they were a snake that had just bitten him. You went through my life? I shot back, my voice finally letting loose some of the ice-cold fury I'd been holding back. You think you had the right to do that, but I didn't have the right to find out? I did it for your brother, he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. He needed those things. He needed a chance. Something you wouldn't understand, with your safe little job and your little apartment. I didn't ask you to steal from him, Leo cried out, finding his voice for the first time. It was shaky, but defiant. Why would you do that? Because you deserved it, Richard snapped, his authority crumbling into desperate justification. Because this family invests in potential. Mason doesn't need a promotion or fancy equipment. He manages on his own. He always has. That was the moment, the final damning confession. And that was when my grandmother played her checkmate. She slammed her palm down on the dining table. It wasn't a loud, crashing sound, but a sharp, resonant thud that silenced every voice instantly. The entire room flinched. His ability to manage on his own does not make him less deserving, Richard, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. It makes him exploited. By you. My father's face was a mottled red. He turned on her. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Mother. Running the company, trying to give my sons the best. You have no idea what it takes. My grandmother smiled. It was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen. It was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. Oh, I think I have a better idea than you can possibly imagine, she said softly. You talk about the company your grandfather built, Carter Construction. You seem to have forgotten a key detail about your inheritance. Richard looked confused. What are you talking about? Dad left the company to me. He left you the title of CEO? She corrected him, her voice slicing through his arrogance. He left you the corner office and the day-to-day responsibilities. But he knew you were reckless. He knew you were arrogant. She paused, letting the words sink in, savoring the moment. So, in his will, he left the controlling interest, 60% of the company's shares, to me. The world stopped. Richard stared at her, his mouth hanging open. My mother looked like she was going to faint. Aunt Carol's jaw was on the floor. I am the majority shareholder of Carter Construction. Richard, my grandmother continued, her voice as calm as a frozen lake. I am, for all intents and purposes, your boss. And as your boss, I find your recent reallocation of assets to be a sign of extremely poor judgment. Not to mention, your attempt to commit bank fraud using your son's identity could bring a scandal that would ruin this company's reputation. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into him. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to rectify this situation immediately, because if you don't, the board will be having an emergency meeting on Monday morning to discuss your immediate termination as CEO. Am I clear? My father sank back into his chair as if the strings holding him up had been cut. The bully, the titan of industry, the lord of the manor, was gone. In his place was just a small, terrified man who had just realized he had been playing checkers while his mother was playing a game of chess he never even knew existed. The power in our family had just shifted, permanently and seismically. And for the first time in my life, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. The aftermath of my grandmother's bombshell was a deafening silence. The shockwave had radiated out from the dining table, leaving everyone paralyzed. My father stared at his plate, his face pale and slack. My mother was openly weeping, quiet, shuddering sobs. My grandmother remained standing, a figure of absolute authority. She looked at me, her expression softening just for a moment. "Mason," she said, her voice now calm but firm. "Tell them what you want." It was the first time in my life anyone in that house had asked me that question with any real weight behind it. I took a deep breath, the air no longer feeling so hard to breathe. I was in control now. "First," I began, my voice steady, "I want my money returned. All of it. Not in installments. Not when you can get around to it. I want a certified check in my hand by the end of the week." I looked directly at my father. "Second, the loan application. I don't want it thrown away. I want to watch you put it through a shredder. Tonight, before I leave." "And third," I said, my gaze sweeping over both of my parents, "I want an apology. A real one. Not an excuse. Not a justification. I want to hear you say you were wrong." My father flinched but didn't look up. It was my mother who spoke, her voice thick with tears. "Mason, we don't have that kind of money just sitting around. To pay it all back at once. Then you'll adjust." My grandmother cut in, her voice like ice. "Sell the new car in the driveway. Cancel your country club membership. Figure it out. Because the alternative, as I'm sure Mason's lawyer would be happy to explain, involves courtrooms and consequences that are far more expensive." The word lawyer hung in the air, another nail in the coffin of their defiance. My father finally looked up. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated look. "Fine," he croaked, his voice raspy. "Fine. You'll have your money." He swallowed hard. "And the loan papers, I'll get the shredder." He pushed himself up from the table, his movements slow and heavy, like an old man. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. He walked over to his office without another word. We all listened to the whirring sound of the small office shredder, methodically destroying the evidence of his final betrayal. He came back a few minutes later and stood there, empty-handed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "We're sorry," he muttered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It wasn't the heartfelt apology I might have once dreamed of. It was the forced confession of a defeated man. But in that moment it was enough. It was an admission of guilt. It was a surrender. I stood up and closed my binder. I put it back in my briefcase. "I'm going home now," I said to the room at large. No one tried to stop me. My mother was still crying. Leo was staring at his hands. My grandmother gave me a proud, sad smile. As I walked out the front door, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind me, it didn't feel like an ending. Felt like a beginning. This is the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me this far. You guys are incredible. If you're still here, please do me a huge favor and like this video and drop a 1 in the comments below, just so I know you made it here with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is genuinely the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I had my hand on the doorknob when a voice called my name. "Mason, wait." I turned. It was Leo. He had followed me into the hallway, his face pale and miserable. His eyes were red-rimmed. The usual swagger he carried himself with was completely gone. He just looked like a scared kid. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. I swear, I had no idea. I thought Dad was just helping me out with money from the business. I never would have taken it if I knew it was yours. I looked at him, the brother I had spent my life resenting. And for the first time, I didn't see the golden child. I saw another victim of our father's manipulations. Why, Leo? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Why did you need that much money? It wasn't just for a tablet and a laptop, was it? He shook his head, looking down at his shoes. No, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I screwed up. I got into online sports betting. Thought I was smart. I lost. I lost big. I owed some pretty serious people a lot of money. The confession hung between us. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained a lot. The pressure. The desperation. I told Dad, he continued, finally looking up at me, his eyes pleading. I was terrified. He went ballistic. But then he calmed down and said he had a solution. He said there were family funds we could use. He made it sound like it was all part of some bigger investment strategy. He told me if I just kept my mouth shut and acted grateful, he would handle it. He said it was my one chance to fix my mistake without ruining my future. He was a pawn. My father hadn't just used my money to bail out his favorite son. He'd used Leo's mistake to control him, to indebt him further, creating a cycle of dependency. It was even more twisted than I had imagined. He told me you wouldn't mind, Leo choked out. He said you were doing fine and that it was my turn. I didn't know what to say. The anger I had felt towards him for years had fizzled out, replaced by a complex, weary sadness. He was weak, and our father had preyed on that weakness, just as he had preyed on my strength. It wasn't your turn, Leo, I said quietly. It was my money, and you're going to have to figure out how to stand on your own 2 feet, without his solutions. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I know. I'm going to pay you back. Even if it takes me the rest of my life. It was the first real, honest conversation we'd had in over a decade. It didn't fix the years of distance between us, but it was a start. It was a crack in the facade of the perfect golden child, revealing the flawed, frightened person underneath. The certified check arrived via courier exactly 4 days later. Holding it in my hands felt surreal. It wasn't just money. It was validation. It was freedom. It was the closing of a painful chapter and the funding for a new one. The first thing I did was walk into my boss's office at the design firm. Mr. Davies was a good man, fair and supportive, the kind of father figure I always wished I'd had. I told him I was resigning to start my own studio. He wasn't surprised. I always knew this firm was just a stepping stone for you, Mason, he said, shaking my hand warmly. You're too talented to work for someone else forever. As I was packing up my desk, Jessica, a colleague who had always been a little too friendly, came over. I heard you're leaving, she said, feigning disappointment. Big plans. Something like that, I said non-committally. 2 weeks later, I learned from a former coworker that Jessica had gone to Mr. Davies right after I left, trying to paint my departure as unprofessional. She'd hinted that I was stealing clients, trying to sabotage my reputation before I even began. But Mr. Davies, who valued loyalty and integrity above all, saw right through her. He not only dismissed her claims but, after a short investigation, found out she'd been bad-mouthing other colleagues for months. She was let go the following week. It was a small, satisfying piece of cosmic justice. I used the returned money to lease a small office space downtown, furnish it with clean, modern furniture, and invest in the best technology. I called it Bedrock Design, because I was building my future on a solid foundation of my own making. The work was hard. The hours were long. But it was the most fulfilling thing I had ever done. Every client I landed, every project I completed, was a testament to my own skill and determination. There were no handouts, no reallocated assets, just pure, unadulterated work. My first major client was Mr. Davies. He hired my new studio to redesign his firm's entire corporate branding. I'd rather pay a premium for talent I can trust, He told me during our first meeting in my new office. That contract gave me the stability I needed to hire my first employee. My parents tried to reach out. My mother would send timid texts. Thinking of you. Hope you're well. My father left a stiff, awkward voicemail once, talking about a misunderstanding and hoping we could move forward. I didn't reply. It wasn't about punishment. It was about peace. I was building a new life, and it didn't have room for their brand of toxic, conditional love. The boundary I had drawn wasn't a wall to keep them out. It was a foundation to build my own house on. And for the first time, the architecture of my life felt strong, stable, and entirely my own. About a year after the dinner, my grandmother and I were having our regular Sunday tea. The success of Bedrock Design had been a quiet but steady climb, and I was finally feeling secure, both financially and emotionally. We were talking about a new client I had landed when she brought up my father. "Richard called me last week," she said, stirring her tea. "The company isn't doing well. Without my shares as collateral, the bank is tightening his line of credit. He's being forced to learn how to operate on a budget." She took a sip, her eyes twinkling over the rim of her teacup. "It's been a difficult lesson for him." I felt a strange pang, but it wasn't sympathy. It was a distant, clinical acknowledgement of a problem that was no longer mine to solve. "I never told you the full story about your grandfather's will," she continued, setting her cup down. "He didn't just give me the shares to protect the company. He did it to protect you." I looked at her, confused. "Even back then, we saw how Richard was with you and Leo," she explained. "We saw the blatant favoritism. Your grandfather worried that Richard would squander the company's resources on Leo and leave you with nothing. Giving me control was his way of ensuring there would always be something left for you. It was his final act of looking out for his quieter grandson." She smiled a sad, knowing smile. "He just trusted me to know the right time to use that power. I was just waiting for you to be ready to fight for yourself, Mason. I couldn't fight your battle for you, but I could make sure you had the best weapon when you were ready to step onto the field." The revelation settled deep in my chest. It was a gift from the past, a final act of love from a man I barely remembered. My grandfather hadn't forgotten me. He had seen me. Later that week, there was a knock on my office door. It was Leo. He looked different. Thinner, maybe, but his eyes were clearer. He was holding a coffee and a small, crisp envelope. "Brought you a peace offering," he said, handing me the coffee. He looked around the office, impressed. "Wow, you really did it." "I'm trying," I said. He handed me the envelope. "It's not much," he said, looking embarrassed. "But it's the first one. I got a job, a real one, at a warehouse graveyard shift. And I'm seeing a counselor for the gambling thing. Every paycheck, a piece of it is going to you, until it's all paid back." I opened the envelope. Inside was a money order for $200. It was a drop in the ocean compared to what was taken, but it felt heavier than the certified check my father had given me. This was earned. This was accountability. "Thank you, Leo," I said, and I meant it. We stood there for a moment in an awkward but not uncomfortable silence. "You know," he said, "for the first time, I think I'm actually proud of something I've done." "Me too," I said. It wasn't a perfect ending. Our family was still broken in many ways, but for the first time we were rebuilding on separate, more honest foundations. And that felt like a start. It's been 3 years now since that dinner. Bedrock Design has 3 full-time employees, and we're moving into a bigger office next month. I'm not rich, but I pay my bills, I love the work I do, and I sleep soundly at night. I see my grandmother every week. Our bond, forged in the fire of that conflict, is the strongest relationship I have. She's my mentor, my confidant, and my biggest cheerleader. My relationship with my parents is distant, civil. We see each other at holidays. The conversations are superficial, careful. They never mention the money. They never talk about what happened. They act as if it was all a bad dream. But it wasn't. It was an awakening. The line I drew that night is still there, bright and clear. They know not to cross it. The power dynamic has been permanently rewired. Leo is still paying me back every single month. The envelopes keep coming. He's a different person now, humbled, harder working, more thoughtful. We talk sometimes. We're not the close brothers I see in movies, but we're not strangers anymore. We're just two men trying to make their own way in the world, finally free from the roles our parents cast for us. Sometimes, I stand here in my office, looking out at the city lights, and I think about the boy who used to make himself small to keep the peace. I think about how silence can be a poison, how keeping the peace can sometimes just mean letting yourself be slowly erased. Breaking my silence was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It cost me the family I thought I had, but it gave me the life I was always meant to live. It taught me that your value isn't determined by how much others are willing to invest in you, but by how much you're willing to invest in yourself. And it taught me that a real family isn't the one that drains you dry and tells you to be grateful. It's the one that hands you a weapon and trusts you to fight your own battles, knowing they'll be standing right behind you when the dust settles. Your real inheritance isn't money or a title. It's the strength to define your own worth. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I truly appreciate you spending this time with me. I hope this story resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up to the very people who were supposed to protect you? I'd be honored if you'd share your thoughts or your own story in the comments below. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Truly helps more than you know.